Hello, everyone. This is Professor Sexton with a video lecture on Act 4 of Othello. So, Act 4 of Othello, Scene 1, starts with Othello and Iago. And this is still the continuation of Iago putting into place his plan to convince Othello that Desdemona is being unfaithful with him. If you remember, at the end of Act 3, the whole issue of the handkerchief that Othello had given to Desdemona, that Desdemona drops, Emilia picks up, gives to Iago. Iago leaves it in Cassio's bedroom or in his chambers. Cassio finds it, gives it to Bianca. All of that has transpired. So in Act 4, Scene 1, one of the things that Iago does is Iago reminds Othello of the handkerchief because Iago says, and this is around about line 13 in Scene 1, he says, if they do nothing, 'tis a venial slip. But if I give my wife a handkerchief, and so he's using a hypothetical example, right? But he knows that in using this hypothetical example, that is going to trigger in Othello's mind the handkerchief that he had given to Desdemona. And a few lines later, Othello responds with, by heaven, I would most gladly have forgot it, thou saidst. So Othello had almost forgotten about the handkerchief, but clever Iago brings it up again, so that staying there in Othello's mind. And then in this act, as there are in a lot of acts, there are a lot of sexual innuendos in this play, and most of them are being delivered by Iago. Around line 45, Iago plays with the word lie, and he says, um, um, Iago starts with lie, and Othello's like, with her? Iago, with her, on her, what you will. And so lie has two different meanings, right? Lie is to tell a falsehood, like she lied on him or she told a falsehood. But lie is also a word that we kind of use to indicate sexual intercourse. Um, and notice how Chicago plays with that lie with her, lie on her. And so all of this is stuff that he's working into Othello's mind. And if you read carefully around this section, and this is still scene 1, around about line 54, out in the margins, there's a note in italics that says that Othello falls in a trance. And exactly what's happening with Othello here is not completely clear. Further down in the another line, it indicates epilepsy. But Iago makes a comment about what's going on with Othello. So he says, if not, he foams at the mouth, breaks out its savage madness. Look, he stirs. So this is the stuff that is happening to Othello. Um, and we don't know if this is a physical condition that he's already had, or if because of what Iago has done, this brings that on. But it's something that's mentioned here first in Act 4, and then it will come back later in the play as well. So Iago continues to manipulate Othello, and what he does is he tells Othello, because Cassio is coming, and he tells Othello to hide himself. And then what he'll do is he'll get Cassio to confess um, how much he's been with Desdemona. Now, here's the trick. When Iago sees Cassio's coming, Iago is asks Cassio about Bianca. Bianca is a prostitute in the play. She plays a minor role, in terms of herself, but in the grand scheme, she's pretty important. But she's a prostitute that Cassio is involved with. And so when Iago sees Cassio, he's actually questioning Cassio about Bianca, but because Othello's in the distance, he doesn't hear that part. So when Cassio starts to speak, Othello believes that Cassio is speaking of Desdemona, when he's actually speaking of Bianca. So you see the way that Iago is working here. And then once again, you know, there's sexual innuendo. So when Cassio and Iago are together, Iago says, "Ply Desdemona well." Once again, the word ply has two different meanings. Ply means to ask for her forgiveness or to ask her to intercede for him with Othello, but ply can also mean sexual. And so this is what Othello hears. Um, and in this scene, you got to read this carefully because in this scene, you have three voices. You have the voice of Cassio, you have the voice of Iago, and then you have Othello's commentary on what he's hearing. When you're reading this, read this carefully because Othello is not a part of the conversation. He's hidden in a corner listening to what is going. And so what you hear is Othello's reflections on what is being said. But keep in mind that Othello believes that Cassio is talking about Desdemona, when in actuality, Cassio is talking about Bianca. So there's a misunderstanding there. Um, but once Othello hears everything that Cassio has said, thinking that it's Desdemona, Othello decides that both Cassio and Desdemona must die. And so he says about line 190, "How shall I murder him, Iago?" Um, and Iago doesn't answer right away, but just reminds him, "And did you see the handkerchief?" Because at this time, Cassio has the handkerchief and he actually brought it out. But he talks about murdering Cassio, but then he talks about how he's going to kill Desdemona. And in this scene, which starts about line 201, he and Iago talk about the different ways to kill Desdemona. At one time, he talks about hanging her, a second time, chopping her into messes, and the next time, poisoning her. But what Iago suggests is, and this is around about line 229, strangle her in her bed, even the bed she had contaminated. And so this seems like a just reason. Now, let me stop here because it's really interesting that Iago's revenge, as it was first presented to us in Act One, simply had to do with the fact that Cassio had been made lieutenant over him. And by this time in the play, Cassio has already lost his position as Othello's lieutenant. And so you're asking yourself, why is Iago proceeding with this? And not only proceeding, he's now putting people's lives in jeopardy that has nothing to do with it. I mean, Desdemona is completely innocent in all of this, right? And so why bring her into this? And so there's something more going on with Iago that the play doesn't actually make clear. So there's a lot of things there that we'll have to try to figure out for ourselves as we continue to read. Um, so as Act Four continues, um, Desdemona comes out. Um, Othello is very upset now because not only has he heard what Cassio said, thinking once again that Cassio was talking about Desdemona when actually he was talking about Bianca. Iago has already poisoned Othello's mind. That now Othello is firmly convinced that Cassio and Desdemona are having an affair. And so there's a scene, roughly around about 245, where Levitico, which is one of the a minor character, is there with Desdemona and Iago. And in this interchange, you can see you can see Othello is very upset. You can see it in the words that he says. And so every time Desdemona says something, Othello makes this comment, but we're not 100% certain whether Desdemona doesn't actually hear it, whether so Othello is saying it silently, or she does hear it and she can't believe it. So, for instance, I'll just give you a few lines of it. So, This is around about line 256, and this is Desdemona speaking. And she says, "A most unhappy one, I would do much to atone them for the love I bear to Cassio." Now keep in mind, when Desdemona says the love she bears to Cassio, she doesn't mean in a romantic way, just in a friendship way, right? And Othello says, "Fire and brimstone." And Desdemona responds, "My lord?" So I mean, either she heard the fire and brimstone or she didn't hear it, and she's thinking, why would he say that? And that's why she responds with, "My Lord." And it continues. She says this a few times. And towards the end of this scene, this is around about line 269, Othello strikes Desdemona. So um, Othello says something like, "I'm glad to see you mad." Desdemona go, "Why, sweet Othello." Othello striking her and then calls her the devil. And Desdemona responds with, "I have not deserved this." And so this is a key pivotal point in the relationship between Othello and Desdemona, because from what we've seen of them previously, the two of these people really love each other. But what you can see now is that Iago's poison, and when I said poison, I don't mean literal poison, I mean figurative poison, the poison that he's poured into Othello's ear to convince him that Desdemona has been unfaithful, has taken its taken its effect when Othello actually hits her. And not only does he hit her, he hits her in public in front of other people as well. So that also plays into consideration. In scene two of this act, we have a scene between Othello and Amelia. And in this scene, what Othello is doing is questioning Amelia about whether Desdemona has been faithful or not. And so he begins the scene by asking, this is Othello, "You have seen nothing then?" Amelia: "No, ever, lord, nor ever did suspect." Othello: "Yes, you have seen Cassio and she together." Amelia: "But then I saw no harm, and then I heard each syllable that Brave made up between them." Othello: "What? Did they never whisper?" Amelia: "Never, my lord." Othello: "Nor send you out of the way?" Amelia: "Never." Othello: "To fetch your fan, her gloves, her mask, nor nothing?" Amelia: "Never, my lord." Othello: "That's strange." And then Amelia says this: "I durst, my lord, to wager she is honest. I lay down my soul at stake." So she's like, "I would risk my soul to prove Desdemona's honesty. If you think other, remove your thought. It doth abuse your bosom. If any wretch have put this in your head, let heaven requite it with the serpent's curse." That line is interesting because what Amelia says, if any wretch has put this in your head, let heaven requite it. And the irony is, the wretch who has put this in Othello's head is actually Amelia's husband, Iago. Um, and so you have this scene between them. And then you have Desdemona, Amelia, and Othello together. And it's a strange scene because right, this is coming after Othello has just hit her in public, and after Othello has just asked Amelia about her faithfulness. But you can kind of see that in this scene between them, there's still a lot of love between them. Um, Desdemona says to Othello, "My lord, what is your will?" And Othello's like, "Pray you, Chuck, come hither." Desdemona: "What is your pleasure?" And Othello: "Let me see your eyes. Look in my face." And once again, when he says, "Let me see your eyes, look in my face," you get that sense that what Othello is trying to see if she's being faithful to him or not. And then eventually, what he does in this scene is he starts to ask her, has she been unfaithful to him? And Othello says, and this is about line 46, he says, "Heaven truly knows that thou art false as hell." So he doesn't even ask her, he accuses her because he says, "You're as false as hell." And she responds with, "To whom, my lord? With whom? How am I false?" And he's like, "Ah, Desdemona, away, away, away." So you can see that now Desdemona has some sense of what it is that is irking Othello, the sense that he believes that she is false. And it continues, and he essentially calls her a whore. Um, This is about line 90. No, I'm sorry, 99. He says, "What? Not a whore?" And this is Desdemona. "No, as I shall be saved." Othello, "Is it possible?" And Desdemona, "Oh, heaven forgive us." Um, and then Othello ends with, "I cry your mercy then. I took you for that cunning whore of Venice that married with Othello, you, mistress." So, Othello calls her a whore there. Um, and then Amelia comes into the scene, and Othello leaves. And Amelia then talks to Desdemona, where Desdemona reveals to Amelia what is happening. And Desdemona says to Amelia, and this is about line 120, 119, "I have none. Do not talk to me, Amelia. I cannot weep nor answer. Have I none but what should go by water? Prithee, tonight lay on my bed my wedding sheets. Remember, and call their husband hither." So it's nighttime, or it's getting close to night, and so she's telling Amelia to put the wedding sheets on the bed. And let me just kind of explain something about this. So um, during this time period, it was traditional, when a man and woman married, their wedding sheets. That marriage, the consummation of it, was a public act, and so on the wedding sheets, um, if the woman is a virgin, there will be blood. And so oftentimes those sheets are shown to show that, that the man has married a woman who was a virgin at that time. And so she's asking for these wedding sheets to be put onto her bed that night. And then Desdemona is still so very upset at Othello calling her a whore. Iago comes into the scene, and then she asked Iago the same thing. So she says to Iago, and this is about line 137, she said, "Am I that name, Iago?" And Iago, "What name, fair lady?" And the name that she's talking about is whore. And then Amelia butts in. She's like, "He called her a whore." And Desdemona responds, "I do not know. I am sure I am none such." That's an interesting statement. So Amelia says that Othello has called her a whore, and Desdemona says, "I am sure I am none such." And even though she says that she's sure that she's none such, that almost seems a sense that she's almost thinking, well, maybe I am, which is really interesting. Um, and then Amelia, once again, Amelia has a lot of insight here. She says, "I will be hanged if some internal villain, some busy and insinuating rogue, some cozening slave to get some office, have not devised this slander. I will be hanged else." She does not realize how accurate she is, because once again, that villain is her husband, and that villain does want to get in office. So Amelia is very accurate here. And then Iago responds with, "Fie, there is no such man. It is impossible." And then Desdemona makes an interesting comment. She says, "If any such there be, heaven pardon him." So Desdemona is like, even if there is someone who telling false to get in office, that she's asking that that person has pardon, which says a lot about Desdemona character. Um, and then there's another part where she kind of asks for forgiveness, not to Othello, but through Iago. And this is around line 175. And she says, "Alas, Iago, what shall I do to win my Lord again? Good friend, go to him. For by this light of heaven, I know not how I lost him." So it's interesting. She's asking Iago to intercede for her. And it is actually Iago who has caused all this marital discord. And once again, this is how clever Iago is in masking how much he's behind all the destruction that is happening in this play. The scene then switched to Rodrigo. So keep in mind that we saw Rodrigo earlier in Act One, and this is the man who was also in love with Desdemona, and Iago convinces Rodrigo to kind of work with him. And what Iago has been doing, he has told Rodrigo to give him jewels with the understanding that those jewels were being given to Desdemona. But in this part, you get that sense that Rodrigo is finally waking up to Iago. Because on the bottom of this, he says, and this is Rodrigo talking, Faith, I have heard too much, and your words and performances are no kin together. So when he said your words and your performances are no kin together, what he's actually saying, your words, which are your words, and your performances, your deeds, are not matching up. And that's why they're not kin to each other. And so you get the sense that Rodrigo is finally beginning to understand. And then he also then confesses the fact that he has given the jewels. And Rodrigo says, the jewels you have had for me to deliver to Desdemona would have corrupted a vultress. You have told me she had received them and returned me expectations and comforts of sudden respects and acquaintance, but I find none. And so Rodrigo thinks that what he's going to do is he's going to ask Desdemona for his jewels back. However, Iago cannot let this happen because Iago has never given the jewels to Desdemona to begin with. And so if Rodrigo asks for the jewels back, then Iago's involvement in this will start to be revealed. So he cannot happen. But clever, clever Iago, even though Rodrigo is very close to the point of like, I'm done, I'm out, and I'm not going to participate, Iago switches it again and get Rodrigo back into plays, like mentioning Cassio, and kind of convinces Rodrigo that if he can kill Cassio, then things will work out. And Rodrigo, being the fool that he is, decides to go with it. In scene three, we have Amelia and Desdemona again. Um, and it's about Desdemona getting ready to go to bed. And Desdemona tells Amelia, he says he will return incontinent and had commanded me to go to bed and bade me to dismiss you. And Amelia's like, dismiss me? So what we can take here is that generally Amelia will stay in the bedchamber, right? Because the way that she says dismiss me, that seems to imply that this is something that's unusual. And then Desdemona, kind of like in this inkling of knowing what's about to happen to her, she says to Amelia, all's one, good faith, how foolish are our minds. If I do die before thee, pretty, shroud me in one of those same sheets. And what she's talking about are those wedding sheets that have been put onto the bed. And then Desdemona tells the story about her mother who had this maid named Barbary, who fell in love with this man, and the man that she loved was mad. And Barbary died singing this song called Willow, Willow, Willow. And Desdemona says that for some reason she cannot get this song out of her head. So you kind of see all this sense that Desdemona has this sense, some inkling that something is going to happen to her. And at this stage of the play, we're still kind of hoping that like something will come to light, that Iago's nature will be revealed, that Desdemona and Othello can be saved. And so we're still reading this with hope that things will turn the tide. The last thing that happens in this act is once again it's Amelia and Desdemona talking. And Desdemona asks Amelia, and this is about line 66. She says, I have heard it said so of these men, does thou in conscience think, tell me, Amelia, that there be women do abuse their husband in such gross kind. So essentially what Desdemona is asking, are there women who are unfaithful to their husbands? This kind of tells us about how young Desdemona is, right? I mean, we don't know how old she actually is in the play because the play never gives us that. But we can kind of get a sense that she is probably pretty young, and that there's a lot about life that she does not know. And Amelia says, Amelia's response is interesting here because Amelia essentially says, yeah, there are women who cheat on their husbands, but sometimes Amelia's kind of like the point, the husbands deserve it, and sometimes it's okay. Essentially, what Amelia says, She said, and I'm going to summarize Amelia's statements here. Amelia essentially says, what is, whatever the husband can do, the woman can do as well. So in like the one of the last long speeches of this act, this is Amelia talking. And let me just kind of quote it. Amelia says, yes, a dozen and many of the advantages would stole the world they played for, but I do think it is their husband faults if wives do fail. So what she's saying there, if a wife fails, and fails, I guess in this context would be cheats, then she says it's the husband's fault. She then goes on to say, said that they slack their duties and pour our treasures into foreign laps. And here that's sexual innuendo once again. So that instead of the husband having sexual relationship with his wife, he's having sexual relationships with someone else. Or else break out in previous jealousies, or a man who's jealous for no reason, or said they strike us. And this is interesting because Othello has struck Desdemona. So almost in a sense that Amelia is saying you would be right, Desdemona, to cheat on Othello. Um, Amelia continues, yet have we some revenge. Let husbands know their wives have sense like them. Skipping down a few lines. And have not we affections, desires for sport, and frailty as men have? Then let them use us well, else let them know the ills we do, their ills instruct us so. So essentially, what she's saying, if women fail, or if women have sexual relationships out of marriage, they only do this because they've seen their husbands do it. And it almost that is that expression, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And that's Amelia's that's her comments. And that what closes Act 4. This is very interesting to keep in mind because when you get to Act 5, which is the final act of the play, look at Amelia's and Iago's relationship there, and then see if you can go back to these last conversations in Act 4 with Amelia and what she has said. So in Act 4, you see things are really ramping up, right? And so that's Act 4. I know that it is a lot to take in as you read it. If something is unclear, if you want to discuss something in more detail with me, feel free to send me an email and I'll be happy to discuss that with you. Okay, bye.